Howdy folks, let me just start by telling you, I think I'm pretty good, not to ring my own bell, but pretty good at expressing myself in the written word. I've written over 500 reviews, I've written over 1,000 magazine articles, I've written a few books, I've written some tech manuals, training manuals, I've written letters, I've written poetry. I'm not that good at poems, by the way. But I've written a ton of stuff over the years, essays for college, and I've always felt that I've been a pretty good writer, and I've gotten compliments on my writing skills and so forth. But part of the thing about writing, especially when I'm writing a review, is you can't express your feelings or thoughts as well, or your attitude, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to start doing video reviews. That's why I started doing this. Because this particular product I'm doing today, you'll see, my review probably comes across as a little cranky at some spots, and I get accused of that quite a bit, that I'm like, you're mean, Jeff, you're just a mean guy. And in reality, if you saw me explain it or talk, I would hope that I could convey it in a better tone so that you'd recognize, oh, I'm not trying to be mean, I'm just trying to be honest. And so, it's hard to express tone in writing, especially sarcasm or irony. Anyway, so the product we're doing today is Blinking Effect by JeanLuc Bertrand, and I gave it 2.5 stars, stone status of grubble, which is right between a gem and a rubble. Here's the problem. I liked watching him. I think he's a nice guy. He's funny. He's entertaining, and it was a lot of fun to watch. And he's got some really cool ideas. Don't get me wrong. But he starts the DVD off by saying, unlike guys like David Stone, this is him talking, unlike guys like David Stone, my magic isn't technical, it's practical. And he mentioned a few other names besides David Stone. That's just the only one coming to me at the top of my head right now. And he knows David Stone. He's worked with David Stone. He's produced some of his stuff. No relation that I know of, by the way, to me. But anyway, he says, unlike David Stone and these other guys, my magic is not technical, it's practical. And I thought, well, that's kind of rude. You basically told David and these other guys that their magic isn't practical. And so now I'm not going to give it a bad rating for that. But his whole point was, look, I don't worry about extremely technical stuff. I worry about being a practical magician with real-world methods that work with real-world people. Okay, well, let's take a look at the 8 effects on here. This is, by the way, it's about a 3-hour DVD. There's 8 effects on here. And there's also, on this bonus disc, there's a 20-minute movie that he produced, that JeanLuc Bertrand produced. And I think he wrote it and everything. It was really cool. It was a very interesting, a little bit macabre, dark, violent-ish. And it was in French, and it had subtitles which were super fast and hard to keep up with. But I got the gist of the story. But the ending was a little bit lost on me. I was a little bit confused about it, mainly because of, I think, just the language barrier. But it was fun to watch, and it was very well shot, very well produced. Anyway, back to the effects. So let's go over the 8 effects real quick. First one is called Influence. If you watched the DVD trailer, that's the one that you saw. Okay, remember he said he's practical, right? Well, the effect you saw was he gives a sealed deck to a spectator. He has the spectator name any card, and then the spectator unwraps the deck, and you spread the deck out, and the named card is reversed in the deck. The deck is not gimmicked. That's essentially the invisible deck trick, right? But it's not an actual gimmicked invisible deck. It's a regular deck. Okay, that's fine. The method uses a gimmick that, right here, that I can't show you because it would expose it. But it also requires that you have to unseal a deck, do something to it, and then reseal the deck. And that's not practical, especially when you have the spectator take the wrapper off during the performance, and then they crumble up the wrapper, so you can't even reuse the wrapper. And so that's not practical at all. If you're doing that strolling, what do you have, 50 decks that are pre-sealed that you've done all the work on? No, not practical at all. Good effect. There's one part about the method I don't like. I hate to even say it, but I'm going to do it. Instant stooging. Not a fan of that. You may be okay with it. I just feel like, I don't think it's a violation of anything. It's just, I feel like I'm robbing that spectator of the moment. I think that I feel bad that that spectator doesn't get to feel the moment. So that's all. I don't. That's why I don't like Instant Stooges. You cough in the DVD. Signature. This is Matt Schulian's card under the tablecloth. Just do Matt Schulian's version or Eugene Berger's handling of it. This version requires you to get to the event or the place you're performing hours in advance when there's nobody there, and prepare all of the tables in advance. Again, not practical, man. That's just not a practical thing, in my opinion. And then if you're doing the signed version, that's really not practical. You have to, I can't say too much without exposing it, but it's just not, it's certainly not the kind of thing where you're just walking up to a table and you can just do it anytime, anywhere. No, you have to have been to that table before, and sometimes you had to have performed for that same spectator in the past. So that's not practical. Bottom card and card bottom card and card watch. This is actually a pretty decent one, and it is relatively practical. This is the old card under the spectator's rear end, where the card vanishes and then they end up sitting on it, and then they stand up and then they get it and then they end up sitting on it again. And then he ultimately ends with a card under watch, Mercury folded. And if you can't do Mercury fold, I believe the way this was structured, you'd actually be able to get away with using a duplicate to do it. So I don't think that's a big deal. But you do need to do the watch portion of it if you're going to continue the routine. Because the watch portion is, in a moment, he's going to do a watch steal, right? And he needs to make sure everybody knows the guy's got a watch. And so rather than going, hey, look, he has a watch, he does this card load effect into the, the folded card underneath the watch. That subtly shows everybody, hey, there's a watch there. And moments later, when it's gone, it's a better effect. So, and that one I would say is pretty practical in method. There's not a whole lot going on there that's too complicated. But the next one, I can't believe you would call this practical. Ring glass. Okay, this is the effect, and it's a very good effect. Don't get me wrong. Borrowed ring linked onto wine glass stem, the stem of a wine glass. And you can hand the glass to the spectator after it's linked, and they can drink out of the glass, and they can't get the ring off. It's really on there. And the only way to get it off is to break the glass, which is how he gets it off in the performance. But the method is you vanish the ring, you hand it off to an assistant who has a station set up somewhere to do all the dirty work, and then he brings the glass back to you at an opportune moment. Okay, if you guys work in the real world at a restaurant, that is not a practical thing. Now, if you're working in, again, a one-off setting, it might be practical, but how do you sneak the glass back into play? He's doing it at a table, with a few spectators around it, and if the guy just walks up and hands him a glass, it's kind of obvious. And he never explains how he gets the glass back into play. I have no idea how he did that. He didn't explain it. It was just all of a sudden there was a glass on the table there for him to use, and he never explained how it got there after the assistant did all the work on it. Not exactly practical. And if you're going to do that more than one time in a night, having this poor guy sitting over at a table with all these glasses that he's loading rings onto, it's just, not practical. Final destination. Okay. This is the epitome of what I'm talking about. In my writing, I probably came across as annoyed. Maybe I was. Hopefully you'll see the smile on my face as I tell you about this. This is the effect. You have a little bag, and there's something in it, like a little drawstring bag. There's something in it. You don't know, the spectators don't know what it is. So you go on this imaginary vacation with a spectator, and ultimately you end up with, she's in a country, and she grabs a souvenir that she's going to take back with her from the country. Inside the bag, which was like a prediction, is the souvenir that she thought of. In the case of the performance, it was an Italian lira, which is an Italian coin. She went to Italy on her imaginary trip. Here's the method. I'll spill it. You have to get lucky. You have to hope that the spectator says an Italian lira. I mean, you steer things a little bit, but Mr. Bertrand says, and I quote, "If they don't name Italian lira, you're screwed. I have no out for this." That's what he said. What kind of an effect is that? I mean, come on. I cannot imagine this thing hits 100% of the time. Even with all of the steering and the psychological ploys involved, it can't hit every time. There's just no way. So at the very least, he could have said, okay, I don't have an out for this, but here's a story of a time where it missed, and here's how I handled it. Here's what I said to the lady when she named the wrong thing or whatever. Nothing like that. It doesn't give any tips on that. Final destination. I just covered that. 6MN routine card. 6MN routine card. Okay, that one was borrow a pack of cigarettes. It turns into a deck of cards. Then he says, "Oh, don't worry, your cigarettes haven't really vanished." And he reaches into his pocket, and the cigarettes are in the pocket. He shows how he makes them change into the deck of cards, but he never shows how they got in his pocket and how he pulled them out of there. So some teaching missing there. Then the deck vanishes, which is actually a pretty cool and simple vanish. All of this stuff you have to be seated, if you know what I mean. Think Slidini, okay, if you know what I'm saying. And then afterwards follows it's an okay effect, which is the kings change into aces, and really that effect there was more meant to establish the normalcy of the deck, because in a minute he's going to switch in a different deck that's not normal, and so this requires a couple deck switches, and you have to have a bunch of different stuff on your person for this effect. A lot of preparation. Not easily reset. I don't know how you can call something like that practical. I just don't understand that. Okay, blinking effect. That is the title effect here. Blinking effect. That one was. It's basically a card on forehead, card under the box, card in the box, card on the box, card over here, card over there, kind of a thing, with the kicker ending of a complete color changing deck with all the faces going blank as well. This requires a body load, a body steal, and a couple other things, and deck switches, and it's not practical, folks. It's doable. I mean, these are all workable methods, but I just wouldn't call them practical, and that was his big claim, that I'm a practical magician. I should also mention, I think it was on the 6MN routine card. He does like a version of hanging coins, David Roth's hanging coins, but he does it with the aces. If that is not technical, I don't know what technical is, because that is very angly and very sleight intensive, and a lot of lapping. Oh, I said the L word, sorry. A lot of lapping and a lot of Tenkai palming and some other crazy stuff. I would not call that a practical versus non-technical kind of thing. It's very technical. Last but not least, you have Barramundi, or I think that's how you say it. I think it's probably a French word. That's his torn and restored card to cigarette. It's actually a very good effect, very pretty effect if you're a smoker. If you're not a smoker, you can't really do it. You could, but it was nowhere near as impactful as the smoking version. He even says, if you're not a smoker, don't do this trick. So I hope I'm not encouraging people to pick up the habit or anything like that. But this one is certainly out for me. I'm not a smoker. I got enough health problems, man. I don't need smoking on top of that. Anyway, so bottom line, those are the 8 effects. I just wouldn't say they were that practical. The methods are pretty doable, but some of them, if the method is that you have to have a team of 500 people, in the background doing X, Y, or Z, and the method's amazing, the effect's amazing, but the method's ridiculous because it requires all those people, it's just not doable, and it's not worth purchasing, in my opinion. Now, he doesn't have one where you need 500 people, obviously, but the stuff in here, I just didn't find it all that practical. If you felt that what the effects I described are ones you'd be willing to do the work for, I'll tell you this, during his 30-minute show, he had, I'm not exaggerating, at least 6 or 7 body loads on him. And that's just me off the top of my head thinking through it. But it allowed him to do some pretty good stuff. He produces roses at every table that he performs at for the ladies, and his production is very pretty. And then he produces the one rose and then he splits it into two. It's very pretty. He uses flash paper a lot, which adds a little bit of an element to his magic that makes it visual, and it's also very pretty to watch. He has a few pointers about that. I will say this: the explanations are very well produced and very well taught, with the exception of the cases where he left out some information that I mentioned. But the way they taught it was very, very cool. They would do cuts to other live performances that they would slow down the footage, and they would expose it. They'd show it from the rear view of it, so you could see what moves were going on. It was very, very well done, very well produced. It's probably one of the best produced DVDs I've ever watched. It's just about the material. And again, I try not to let my opinion of whether or not I would do the effect or if I like the effect sway my review. I try to base it all on product quality. But part of product quality is how good is the method. If the method is ridiculous, which I think some of these, in my opinion, are ridiculous, at the very least they're very intensive and they're just not practical, which was his big claim. So, sorry, this is the longest review video I've ever done, and the written review is pretty dang long. Make sure you go over there and read it. So let's move on. Enough of that. Really? Okay. Finally, iTunes random moment is... oh, the Black Crowes, man. Here's a blast from the past. Hard to handle. You guys remember them? Oh, yeah. First time I heard the Black Crowes, I was in the mall. I believe I was in Connecticut back in the 90s. And I was in a, was it a music store? Because they had music stores back then. Some store, I can't remember. But it was playing in the background, and I thought this was some 70s band that I missed out on. I just heard that it was that very song, and I just played for you. And I heard that in the background. I'm like, man, who's this band? These guys are awesome. I must have missed them. I dig 70s rock, And she's like, the Black Crowes. I'm like, man, I've never heard of them. She's like, well, they're brand new. That's why. So, but they have that nice sort of 70s rock sound to it. I really liked it. It was nice and refreshing in the early 90s when we were just getting over the Wilson Phillips craze or whatever that crap was. Sorry, Beach Boy fans, daughter of Beach Boy fans. Just not a fan of that stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling. I'll see you guys in the next review. Thanks for watching. Peace out.